It was a moment that nobody expected. During a recent gathering, T.D. Jakes was asked a question that had been circulating for years: rumors surrounding Bishop Paul Morton. The atmosphere instantly shifted. People leaned forward, curious to see how Jakes would respond. For a long time, he had remained silent whenever the topic came up, choosing to let the noise pass. But this time was different. His voice grew softer, yet carried a heavy weight, as if he had finally decided to break years of silence. The room became so quiet that even a whisper could have been heard. His eyes reflected both pain and respect, signaling that what he was about to say would not be ordinary. Everyone knew something important was coming, something that would change how people viewed those rumors forever. For years, whispers had followed Bishop Paul Morton wherever he went. No matter how much good he did, there was always a shadow of speculation around him. People talked in church hallways, in quiet corners of conferences, and even online, questioning his choices and his personal life. Some claimed he carried secrets too heavy to share. Others believed that his leadership style was hiding something beneath the surface. These rumors, often fueled by jealousy or half-truths, became louder over time. Yet, through it all, Paul Morton never responded. He chose silence, letting people wonder and letting God be his defender. But the silence only made the rumors grow stronger, and with every passing year, the mystery around him became larger than life. People didn't just see him as a leader, they saw him as a figure wrapped in unanswered questions. T.D. Jakes did not speak about Bishop Paul Morton as just another pastor or leader. He spoke about him as a brother. Their bond went beyond pulpits and conferences. They had shared moments of laughter, prayed for each other in times of weakness, and encouraged one another when ministry felt overwhelming. Jakes often recalled how Morton stood by him when critics tried to tear him down, offering wisdom and a quiet strength that few could provide. In return, Jakes had always admired Morton's courage and humility. To the outside world, they were two giants of faith, but to each other, they were family. This deep connection made every word Jakes spoke about Morton carry more weight. He wasn't just confirming or denying rumors. He was defending someone he had walked life's toughest roads with. That closeness is what made his voice tremble when he finally decided to speak the truth. When T.D. Jakes spoke about Bishop Paul Morton, his words were never shallow. Their relationship was not built on titles or fame. It was built on trust, loyalty, and years of walking through both victories and valleys together. Long before cameras and microphones were pointed at them, the two men had already formed a bond that most people never saw. They prayed for one another in private, they exchanged words of encouragement when life's burdens became heavy, and they leaned on each other like true brothers in Christ. There were times when T.D. Jakes himself felt overwhelmed by the pressures of ministry, moments when critics tried to tear him apart, and it was Paul Morton who would quietly remind him of his calling. Morton never needed the spotlight in those moments. He simply stood firm, offering a kind of wisdom that came only from experience and pain. In return, Jakes carried a deep respect for Morton's courage. He admired how Morton faced storms without bitterness, how he chose humility when he could have chosen pride, and how he carried himself with dignity no matter what people said. To the world, they were two powerful leaders, icons who filled arenas and touched lives through their words. But behind the scenes, they were more like family. They laughed together, they shared personal struggles, and they celebrated each other's victories in ways outsiders could never fully understand. This brotherhood was sacred. And because of that, whenever T.D. Jakes spoke about Paul Morton, it was never from a place of gossip or hearsay. It was from a place of lived experience. That is why, when Jakes finally decided to confirm the truth about the rumors, his words carried so much weight. He wasn't a distant observer commenting on someone else's story. He was a witness. He had walked alongside Paul Morton in the quiet hours. He had seen the strength it took for him to keep moving forward. And he had felt the depth of his faith up close. Every word Jakes spoke was tied to memories only he could share, and it was that closeness that made his voice heavy with emotion. When T.D. Jakes finally opened his mouth to speak, the room seemed to freeze. For a moment, his eyes lowered, as though he was gathering the strength to say something that had been locked away for years. His voice trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of truth. "There have been things said about my brother, Bishop Paul Morton," he began slowly, his words deliberate, each syllable pressing into the silence. "And for too long, people have allowed rumors to define a man whose life has been nothing but service." The audience leaned in closer. Many had come expecting denial or excuses, but what they heard was something far deeper. Jakes explained that the rumors surrounding Morton were built on fragments of truth, twisted by those who didn't understand the full story. Yes, Morton had struggles. Yes, there were moments where his choices raised questions. But behind those moments was a man who carried burdens so heavy that few could ever imagine. Morton had sacrificed his own comfort, his own reputation at times, to protect his ministry, his family, and his faith. T.D. Jakes went on to reveal that much of what people misunderstood about Morton was actually tied to his willingness to put others first. He carried pain silently, choosing not to respond because he never wanted his defense to become a distraction from his calling. He suffered in silence, Jakes said, his voice breaking slightly, not because he was guilty, but because he was selfless. He wanted the church to move forward without his name being dragged into the center of every battle. People in the room began to nod, some even wiping tears. For the first time, the rumors didn't sound like mysteries anymore. They sounded like the cost of a man's devotion. The confession wasn't just emotional, it was transformational. Jakes wasn't simply clearing Morton's name. He was rewriting the way people would remember him, shifting the focus from rumor to resilience, from speculation to sacrifice. And in that moment, Paul Morton's silence finally had a voice. After his confession, T.D. Jakes paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words settle in the hearts of those listening. Then he spoke again, this time addressing the question that had puzzled people for years: why Bishop Paul Morton had never spoken out himself. Why had he allowed the rumors to linger without ever defending his name? Jakes explained that Morton's silence was not weakness. It was not guilt. It was a choice, a deliberate act of faith. Morton believed that his work, his ministry, and his life's testimony were louder than any rumor ever could be. He had often told those close to him, "If I spend my time chasing lies, I'll have no time left to preach truth." That was the kind of man he was, focused not on proving himself to people, but on staying faithful to God's calling. Jakes described how Morton carried that silence with dignity. While many leaders would have held press conferences, released statements, or fought to clear their image, Morton chose a harder road. He stayed quiet even when it hurt. He believed that the truth would one day speak for itself, and until then, his only responsibility was to keep serving. His humility was his shield, and his faith was his defense. T.D. Jakes' voice grew stronger as he continued. Paul Morton never allowed bitterness to take root in his heart. He never let the lies define him. Instead, he let his life's work, his psalms, his sermons, his leadership, tell the story. And today, that story speaks louder than any rumor ever could. The audience sat in silence, realizing the power of those words. Suddenly, Morton's silence no longer looked like avoidance. It looked like strength. It was the kind of strength that only comes from a man who knows his worth is not determined by public opinion, but by the legacy he leaves behind. News of Jakes' words spread quickly beyond the room. Clips of his confession began circulating on social media, and within hours, thousands of comments poured in. Many supporters praised Jakes for his courage to speak out, calling his statement a reminder that leaders are human and that silence can often be more powerful than defense. Others admitted they had once believed the rumors, but now felt ashamed for having judged Morton without knowing the full story. Of course, not everyone was convinced. A few skeptics still clung to their doubts, insisting that where there was smoke, there must be fire. But even their voices seemed smaller compared to the overwhelming outpouring of love and respect that began flooding in for Paul Morton. Pastors, church members, and even people who had never met him personally began sharing stories of how his ministry had impacted their lives. The public reaction revealed something powerful. People were hungry for truth, but even more than that, they were touched by Morton's resilience. His silence, once misunderstood as guilt, was now seen as wisdom. His endurance through years of whispers was now viewed as strength. And, in many ways, Jakes' confirmation had not only silenced the rumors, but had elevated Morton's legacy even higher than before. As T.D. Jakes brought his words to a close, his voice softened, carrying both the weight of truth and the warmth of brotherhood. He reminded everyone that rumors,